lines really are complicated, unknown, misunderstood, and even to a lot of people, just a thing. Oh, just give me a 5-foot fly line, just something that matches my rod. But there's much more to a fly line than that, and choosing the right line will have a great result on your day. You choose the wrong line, it's not going to work. Your day is going to be miserable. And if you choose the right line, your rod casts beautifully. It's a beautiful blend of balance and loading, and everything's good. So understanding a little bit about fly lines, pretty important at this stage of the game, because you're going to go out and you're going to buy yourself a fly line if you've already got the rod and reel. So let's talk about fly lines. I'm going to keep it fairly simple. I can get really nitty-gritty and into depth and bore everybody to death with fly lines because I love them and I'm kind of passionate about them. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to touch on some real basic things to think about. So here's a fly line. It's on the reel. It's just a bit of thicker colored stuff. That's the weight for casting, the weight that bends your rod, the weight that takes your fly out. That's what your fly line is. And really a fly line's pretty simple in what it's made of. A fly line starts with what's called the core. The core, this is a fly line core. This is its strength. This is an uncoated fly line, essentially. What happens to this is this gets coated in a liquid plastisol. Right? This is a liquid PVC, and these will go into an oven and they'll cure, and what happens, out comes a fly line. So really a fly line is pretty simple in components, a core and a coating. They differ, but we're not going to go into that. Not yet, anyway. So all this time we've been talking about the kind of the basic fly fishing kit being a 9-foot 5-weight rod and getting that reel that takes a 5-weight line. And we're talking about getting a 5-weight fly line as well to go onto that 5-weight rod. So if you've got a 5-weight rod, we need to get a 5-weight line. But how do you know? Well, there's a thing on a fly line box called the code. It's written on boxes, it's printed on fly lines, it's printed in catalogs, it's printed in websites. And the code is this thing down here, these large letters. And you'll see in the case of this one, this has 4 letters or letters and numbers, DT4F. And that will tell you everything you need to know about this fly line. So what is the code? Well, the first 2 letters refer to the shape. The shape is either going to have DT or it's going to have WF. Those are the first 2 letters. It's either going to be DT or WF. Hands down, by far, the commonest is WF. So if you're getting into this for the first time, forget about the DT, get the WF. And what WF means, it stands for what shape the fly line is. So the first 2 letters tell you the shape. WF stands for weight forward. DT stands for double taper. Now, you're not going to know what that is, so I'm going to spin this box around and hopefully you'll be able to see on the back of this box the shape of the line. This box actually has both shapes here side by side to give you a rough idea. A line at the bottom is a DT. So the DT line here is all fat blue, fat orange, and then a little taper at this end and a little taper at that end. Okay, that's a DT, fat with a taper at each end. A WF, a weight forward line, this is the same line, but in a weight forward version, you can see that this orange section is very, very, very thin. And then the head, the blue bit's very, very fat. In other words, all the weight is forward. Weight forward, double taper. And this thin line behind it, that's called running line. I'm not going to go into the whys and wheres of double tapers and weight forwards at this point in time. Do start with a weight forward. Hands down, it's the easiest line to start off casting. Maybe down the road, you'll go to a double taper line. So that's what the code is. The first 2 letters refer to the shape of that line. Then the number comes in, and that number, in this case a 4, that relates to your fly rod. Got a 5-weight rod, then that line number should say 5-weight. That's your match. If I've got a 4-weight line, I better hope that my rod's a 4-weight rod. That would be a match. A 4-weight line on a 5-weight rod is not a match. Okay, so that's what that second thing is, that number. And then the last little thing is a letter that's either going to be F or S, possibly I. And that refers to its density. This line floats, so it's going to end in an F. It means when you cast it out, the whole line sits on the top of the water and just floats. Again, probably your go-to line is going to be a floating line. Probably your go-to line should be a weight forward. And if you have the 5-weight rod, because that's probably your go-to rod, the standard line most people fish and buy when they start off fly fishing is a WF 5F. That's what that code is. Now, we could stop there, but because this chapter and this whole episode is on fly lines, I'm just going to delve into some of the other ways a line can change. And instead of the line saying F, it could say S. And S, as in this one, this is a WF6S. S means the line sinks. Okay, F for float, S for sink. That part's pretty easy to understand. But after the S, there is a number 3. And if I take up another fly line and compare them side by side, you'll see that this one says WF6S3, and this one says WF5S6. Okay, so they're both weight forwards. Hopefully you got that. This is for a 6-weight rod. This is for a 5-weight rod. They both sink, but that last number tells you the difference between the two sinking lines. This one sinks at 3 inches every second. And this one sinks at 6 inches. That's what that last number does. Sink 6. 6 inches every second. So it kind of do this kind of thing. Right? This is a much faster sinking line. Gets down to the deeper parts of the lake way quicker than this one. And so as a regular trout angler, you're unlikely to go into sinking lines, but if you start getting into sinking lines, that's what those numbers mean. At the very end, it's how fast it sinks in inches per second. And the last little letter that it can end in, it could end in a letter I, like this. This is a weight forward 6I. The I stands for intermediate. And really what that means, it's a line that kind of sinks very slowly. It's not quite a floater, and it's definitely not as fast as sinking as a sinker. So this is a very, very slow sinking line. And in fly line terminology, that means it's an intermediate. So its designation at the end is always going to be I for intermediate. And as if that wasn't enough, the boffins who came up with sinking lines and floating lines and numerals and letters and codes have also mixed them up. They've mixed them up to say something like this. This says WF8FS3. Hopefully you can work that out. If I said, pop quiz, what does that mean? Well, could you work that out? Well, yes, kind of. Weight forward, good. 8-weight, got an 8-weight rod, that's good. Floating and sinking. Well, a line can't do both. So what that means is most of the line floats, but the front section, the front tip of that line sinks. So this is what's called a sink tip line. It's a floating line where the front end sinks, and in this case, the front end sinks at 3 inches per second. So fly lines have these codes. You can also get, and you should certainly work this one out now after I've just explained all that to you. What do you think that means? This one has WF6FI. Answers on a postcard? To me. Ha, just joking. It is WF means weight forward, 6 for a 6-weight rod, F floating line with an intermediate slow sinking tip. So that's the code. As I said, pretty complicated, but logical, I think, once you understand it. And that means when you go into a fly shop and you've got your 5-weight rod and you're looking for a particular fly line, you can start to choose that line by working out what that code is and choosing the right line for what you want to do. Once you've chosen the right line, you're going to stick it onto your fly reel. But as we talked about in reels, between the reel and the fly line, you put on something called backing. Here's backing. And you'll note that this thing says 2 things, 20 pound, 100 yards. Now, what backing is, essentially backing is an extension to your fly line. Your fly line, most fly lines are about 90 feet long. Let's say you make a lovely cast, it goes out 60 feet, and you hook the fish of your lifetime. And that fish is strong and big and it swims away. Well, if you've got 60 feet out and your line's only 90 feet, you can run out of line real fast and lose the fish because you ran out of line. So almost invariably, before you put your fly line on, you want to put this stuff called backing on. It's way cheaper than fly line. It's way thinner than fly line. And so underneath the reel, in this case, on this reel here, underneath my fly line, I'm going to have about 100 yards of 20-pound backing, because that's a great go-to backing for the trout angler. I'm going to wind that on, and then once I wound my backing on, I'm going to attach my fly line to that backing. And on that note, here is a fly line. when you open up these beautiful boxes and pull out the fly line, it's usually going to be on some kind of plastic spool. And why that's important? Well, that part's not important, but what is important is if I pull off the end that's on top, you'll see that there's a label. There's a label at the back end of this fly line. And this label actually says, attach this end to backing. This is how you know it's the back end of your line. Now, cast your mind back, a couple of minutes ago when I was showing you the difference between a double taper line and a weight forward line, right? A weight forward line has weight at the front end. So the worst thing you can do with a weight forward line is put the weight at the back, attach the weight to the reel, and have the thin stuff at the front. You're trying to cast this thin stuff, and it's going to go nowhere because it's thin and light. So you've got to get a weight forward on the right way around. And so almost all line manufacturers have a little label saying, attach this end to your backing. That means this is the thin part. And then as you wind your line on, you're going to find that I'm going to wind all this yellow stuff on, and then I'm going to wind on that, and I'm going to come to the green section, and that becomes the fat stuff, the weight forward line. And at the end of that fat weight forward line, there's also an end, also with a loop. So they've got loops on each end. But with this label is telling me which end to attach the reel. And I think the last thing to talk about on this really is just a word of warning to avoid frustration and throwing away a brand new fly line. And that word of warning is how you should wind the line onto the reel. They come on plastic spools for a reason, not so you can take them off and throw them away and try and attach your fly line and wind it on this way. You do want to keep the fly line on the spool, and you want to put a little pen through the center hole here, kind of create a rotating drum. And when you wind on, you want to make sure the drum rotates in this direction. So I'm winding like that, pulling line off. And I say that because the other thing you could do, which I see a lot, is you can try and wind the line off this way, side on, like a clock face, coming off around. And that will put in endless twist and spin into your fly line. Don't ever do that. You'll get so annoyed with the frustrated twists and spins on the line. So once you attach your backing to your fly line, stick a pen through, get your buddy to hold the end of this, or stick it between your knees and wind in, making sure the line spins in this vertical plane rather than off the face of the clock. You'll see there's a couple of twisties here, right, that are holding the line in place. So you'd obviously undo those twisties first. I just don't want to undo this and get line all over the place. But that's it. That's how you attach your line to your backing onto the reel. And as I showed you just now, on the front end of that line, there's that green loop. And that green loop is for attaching your leader to. And that's the very next thing we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the various different types of leader you can and should use in fly fishing.